Welcome to the Rock Guitar Confidential podcast with Ryan and Scott. Today's episode, is the tone really in your fingers or is it in your gear? Let's find out.
All right, well, welcome back to Rock Guitar Confidential with Scott and Ryan.
That's right. I'm Scott and you're Ryan. Pretty sure
That's right.
That's the way it
That's
works
right.
here.
Scott Allen and Ryan Bowe here.
That's
Here to
right.
talk to you about all sorts of guitar and rock music related topics.
Exactly. So if you like rock and guitar, you're in the right place. So today's podcast is going to be gear versus practice. And this is getting into the age-old question, is your tone in your fingers or is it in your gear? And this comes up because Ryan and I both teach a lot of guitar lessons.
Full time.
Yeah, exactly. And very often we'll have students come in who are asking questions about developing good tone, and they seem to be sort of really fascinated by what kind of pedals they can buy, what kind of effects boxes they can get. They want to have new, plugins for their DAWs and stuff like that. And I always end up following that with like, okay, but did you practice this week at all? And they usually look at me like, well, I got this new pedal. And so that's something that I think we need to explore a little bit here.
Yeah, and and it happens with the young ones, and it happens with the adults too.
I actually find it's more the adults who have, because they have the money. They can go buy like a new pedal every week and stuff like that. And look, I would say this: my gut feeling on it is that I think that you need to be inspired by what you're hearing when you're playing guitar. You need to have something that makes you look forward to picking up the guitar and makes you have fun. That's what the whole thing's about for a lot of folks. But at the same time, I think it can be sort of like a quixotic battle because you're really only going to get good tone if you know how to play guitar. I've said this a million times, and it sounds a little bit snarky, but the best secret to getting good guitar tone is learning how to play guitar really well.
Yeah,
that's the key.
It's the best way to good tone is to play with intent.
Yeah. And skill and finesse and all the things you develop when you practice.
Musicianship.
So that's not to say that the gear doesn't matter, but if it was like a spectrum, I would say it's probably like a 90-10 sort of thing.
I was taught by my second guitar teacher ever, a guy named Billy Rainey. I think
good guy.
Great.
Buddy of mine.
Best.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I remember specifically him telling me that, effects are just for like filling in the little spaces. It's like the icing on the cake.
Yeah, I almost think that I would go a slightly different analogy, like spices. If you have a great meal, then having the right spice on top of it can make it even better. But that being said, like if the way that a lot of people approach it is they spend all their time worrying about what the cayenne pepper and what their paprika is going to be.
You don't want to eat a bowl of cumin.
Yeah, exactly. So like you need to have something there first before you worry about what kind of spices you're going to add on top of it.
Right.
And I think that's something that it's just. I think what it comes down to is it's human nature. People want to be able to go to the store and buy it and not have to go and earn it. You know what I mean?
Well, and I'll add another wrinkle into that. Being that I worked in music retail for a couple of decades.
So sorry, Ryan.
Hey, it's okay. I survived.
You came out mostly intact.
Hey, there's other forms of retail that, so
yeah.
At least, definitely. At least you get to work around musicians all day, so that's cool.
And some drummers and singers too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, the drummers and bass players.
No, bass players, they get some love, man. I'll give bass players some love. Drummer,
I'll transfer the love to the vocalists, but that's okay.
That's true.
We need
vocalists are okay. All right.
So, you gotta. This is going to harken back to one of our previous podcasts where we were talking about the effect of industry, on these trends.
Yeah, it's true.
The fact of the matter is that there are engineers that work for a variety of. I mean, I don't want this to sound like because some of these are companies that I love, right?
Yeah.
So Roland makes the best stuff for musicians, right?
Great company.
They are such a great company. They just make great products for musicians. But, there's an engineer that works there that needs to keep, their job. And their job is to design new stuff to put in a pedal to sell to you what's called in the industry the recreational musician.
Yeah. And there's also growth that these companies expect too in sales, and you can't keep selling the same widget over and over again necessarily. So you have to have a new thing.
You have to at least repackage that widget. Yeah.
That's why there's so many reissues and so many like artist signatures, which is kind of almost the same packaging, and it's kind of nuts how that works. But I don't know. I think that when it comes to tone, though, all the guys that we look at as having the most amazing guitar tone. If you look back at, like, say, Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen or Clapton or, down the line, John Sykes, James Hetfield, amazing rhythm guitar tone, Tony Iommi, those guys, the sound is definitely in their fingers. If you plug them
or in their stumps.
Yeah, in the case of Tony Iommi, that's correct.
In the case of Tony Iommi,
their thimbles. It's in their thimbles.
The leather thimbles.
Yes, that's true. But those guys, if you plug them into a Supra, are going to sound just like they sound. You know what I mean? And that shows you right there that it's really in how you attack the instrument. That's where your tone comes from.
Sure. Oh, and I've been, I've seen local guitarists, like Michael Gregory for one.
Well, Michael Gregory's an amazing guitar player.
Dude, brilliant, man. Yeah. And dude, I remember as a kid, he'd come into the little music store where I worked, and dude, he could make a Memphis guitar plugged into a Gorilla amplifier sound like God.
Yeah.
Well,
that should be an eye opener right there when you're young too. It's like, okay, that guy just made this piece of garbage sound great.
Yep.
So what is this all about, really? And I think in a way, because when I started playing, I'm not sure what your experience was, but when I first started playing, I had a Memphis Strat copy with single coils into a crate amplifier. And go make that sound like Eddie Van Halen, kid.
Yeah, that's right, dude. I had a crate G10 XL, and I had a Memphis, I think it was called an ST2. It had like it had the pickups that didn't have pull pieces, so they look like EMGs.
Yeah, but they're not.
No, they weren't. Dude, they were microphonic. Me and my buddy used to take turns screaming into the bridge pickup, because it would, pick that up.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's so funny. But that's a thing that I think that makes for a better guitar player in a lot of ways, because you have no safety net. You got to make that sound good with the worst possible tools imaginable.
Yeah.
So to make that sound passable, that you have to find a way to attack it with your fingers and your pick in such a way that you're driving that tone to happen.
Yep.
Whereas I think now, and this is a kind of a double-edged sword, is I think that for hobbyist guitar players nowadays, you can get a relatively inexpensive amp that's got every bell and whistle you can possibly imagine, and you can get a legitimately good guitar for like $240.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like with CNC machines, and here's where technology really has, moved the ball forward.
Yeah.
I got my cousin's kid an Ibanez RG,
Good man.
Yeah, man, for Christmas. Of course. Well, hey, she's my student, and you know what? She practices. She understands the dynamic of, you come to your lesson, and then I tell you to do stuff.
And you do that.
Yeah, then you go home and you do that stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then you come back the following week, and then, I tell you to do other stuff. It's terribly complex, but, she does all that, you know? And so... congratulations, your cool cousin's going to buy you a guitar.
Yeah. And I think what's funny now is...
it's a great guitar.
You can start off and have... a lot of my students have Yamaha Pacifica guitars, which are not nice. Amazing guitars, but they're really solid guitars really well for what
built.
They are.
Oh, my God. Yamaha's always made... Yamaha's another one of those companies where you just know that everything they make is built really well.
Yep, that's totally true.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny... I should probably lay this out on the table because there might be some conflict of interest stuff. But I do have equipment endorsements with different companies. I will try to not shill for them. I won't ever do that because I believe in those instruments.
One of my best friends works for EMG Pickups. So shout out to EMG. I love my new yellow pickups.
There you go. Exactly. But, I feel like everybody needs to understand that while there's great instruments out there, there's really, really cool instruments that you can also get that are more budget friendly that I think students are going to be wanting to buy. So I'm not saying that they're better than what I would use necessarily, but it's amazing there's that option for people.
Yeah, you know absolutely, man. Yeah, dude, like my Memphis ST2 costs I paid. My parents made me buy it for myself, which that's a whole other topic.
Yep, I had the same thing. I had to go house sit my neighbors to earn the money for my first electric guitar.
Dude, I don't even know how. I think I used to go into my dad's dresser and pick up loose change. I must have done that for a year. Dude, it was $199 in,
And back then, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, in 1990 or 1991 or something like that. So adjusted for inflation, dude, I got my cousin's kid her guitar for I think $250.
Isn't it amazing the difference in quality? It's insane.
It's nuts.
It's a real instrument. It's like a real playable guitar.
Yeah.
It's what we had was just like this thing with strings on it.
Dude, there was a vein of green wood in the headstock of my Memphis guitar. And the body was made out of plywood.
Yeah, it's particle board, right?
Yeah. And then later on, I paid our luthier, Michael Gardner, a great guy. Mm-hmm. We lost him recently.
I didn't know
that. Dearly missed. But I paid him. Whatever the labor was, it was $250 for the Kaler Flyer tremolo, plus maybe another $100 labor to install it on my Memphis. On the plywood body.
I did the same thing with my Memphis. I got to the point now where I couldn't justify keeping it anymore as it was such a piece of garbage at a certain point. So I bought a new neck. I mean, I literally took a guitar that was maybe worth $50, and I put like $500. But I bought a new neck for it, bought new pickups, pickguard, basically everything except for the piece of crap body.
Yep.
And that kept that part, but I made it at least a playable guitar. You know what I mean? And it was just a sentimental thing, but it's amazing like how you can do that. You can take this old piece of junk and you can make it something that's, you know, a playable instrument.
And it's interesting. So for, you know, so like so when we were buying music gear when we were that age, it was all just to make our stuff work right. Like we couldn't even think about buying pedals and stuff and processors and all that. I just wanted my guitar to stay in tune when I used the whammy bar.
Yeah, you know, I remember having an amp for many years before I realized, oh, can I put a distortion pedal into this thing? I didn't even know that was an option. Is that what I should be doing? You know, and it was, you know, it's funny too because it was such a hard thing to go to the music store when I was a kid too. I had to like convince my mom to drive me to the store, and you know, and I never had any money, and she wasn't going to go drop, you know, hey, can you go drop $200 today on guitar pedals for me just to play around? You know, that just didn't happen back in those days.
But you know what? Nothing would keep you from it.
That's true.
I remember my dad grounded me once, and so I defied him and got on my bicycle, and I rode 5 miles to make it to my guitar lesson with Billy Rainey.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I tied my bike to like a bollard, you know, the ones that they, you know, put up in the concrete to keep like other people from driving cars.
Oh, yeah.
Keep people from driving cars into stuff.
Yep.
Well, I mean, you know, anybody who was like 5 feet tall could have just lifted my bike up off the bollard and stole it.
Thankfully, nobody in history at that time was over 5 feet.
Yeah,
so that
yeah,
was,
right,
that was
right.
really totally
yeah,
safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was like the Titanic was on her maiden voyage. Yeah, man. And, you know, my dad followed me the whole way. I didn't know it.
Oh, really?
He followed me. He made sure that my bike didn't get stolen. I came out of my guitar lesson and saw that my bike was tied to a tree. And then I rode back home.
Knew the jig was up.
Yeah, I knew the jig was up, man. Yeah, and then, you know, my mom told me later on that, like, yeah, your dad followed you so you wouldn't get hurt.
Oh, that's sweet. That's actually a sweet story.
Right, but he didn't keep me. He was like, oh, my kid really wants to go to his guitar. Okay, we'll let him fight for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
That's really, really cool. That's
cool
a great
stuff,
story.
Huh?
Absolutely. But, I mean, I think what that shows, though, is that the lengths that which you would do to play guitar and to try and get, you know, good tone and stuff. I mean, you just had to figure it out on your own back then. Not to say that there's a lot of advantages to now because the gear is so much better for someone. If you're looking for a good tone, it's right there now. You know what I mean?
True. And you know what? I have a lot of, you know, so now we live in the age of modeling amplifiers.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how many of your students have a Boss Katana amp?
Or like a Vox Valvetronics or something.
Right, or like a Black Star or something. I mean, all those amps just sound awesome. Dude, I can't imagine any crate amplifier sounding like any of those.
It's almost impossible to imagine how bad those little crate amplifiers sounded. They're just so terrible.
Dude, yeah, I've had my reservations in hell since I was a teenager for selling crate amplifiers like actually accepting like American currency in exchange for a crate amplifier. Then man, that's.
Well, you know what though, when you don't know, you don't know. Back then, that was the only amps in the store. When you walk in, they have crates. Okay, I'm going to buy a crate. That's what I got. You know, it's. I remember thinking that the Marshalls were like the unattainable holy grail back in those days. But
that's right. Well, and hey, at least crate amps looked cool.
Yeah, and they
did not sound cool.
They got better a little bit as they went, but you know, I think standards just got higher more than anything else. You know what I mean? But all right, getting back to the point though, is that you know the tone is going to come out of your fingers in your attack. That's going to be overwhelming what it's going to be. To me, I think it's like a 90-10, 80-20 kind of thing. It's you're playing versus what you're putting into. So if you have an amp that's not a very good amp or is not capable of producing a great tone, no matter how great you play, it's going to be limited. There's like a cap on how good it can possibly sound. If you have decent gear, you don't even need to have amazing gear. If you have decent gear,
right, like a Boss Katana or a Black Star, any of those.
Yeah, amps, or to go up and like maybe like if you have like a 50 watt, you know, let's say Marshall JCM 2000, or if you have something like that, or if, you know, let's maybe a PV 6505 or something like that, you're going to be able to get a great tone out of that if you're a great guitar player. You know, I think that's the key, and I think that anything above that, you're really looking at like sort of. You know, degrees of better. It's not going to be like night and day better. It's going to be just a little bit better. And keep in mind that I think too, what's people forget about is that better is a subjective thought. You know what I mean?
Right. You know, I'm sure you get a lot of students too who, you know, since we do live in the age of the modeling amp where there's a lot of knobs on that face, you know, plate or that panel. I get students all the time asking me to help them set up their tone.
Yep.
And what I do every single time is I put the bass, middle, and treble right exactly in the middle. and then season to taste with the gain on the drive channel, and then like that's it, right?
And if you have like a reverb or delay, add that as you want to, or something like that.
And then very conservatively, my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, but that's seasoning at the end of the day. You kind of have the part right there. And you can say, okay, let's just sprinkle on that will delay a reverb or chorus or whatever it is, just to taste.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know, I feel like there's definitely this like sort of undercurrent though, especially of the professional class, hobbyist guitar players, people who have money to spend.
Not professional musicians, but people who are professionals.
Yes,
otherwise.
people who are like bankers, doctors, lawyers, that kind of thing. Who are well heeled, who can I've had lessons in the past with people who would own every piece of gear imaginable. I remember one guy I was teaching on a Zoom lesson. He had like 6 or 7 Mesa Boogie full stacks behind him. He had like PRSs. He had like the whole thing, Les Paul customs, and he would struggle with playing a minor pentatonic scale. Yep. And I'm thinking, okay, now there's a giant disconnect between your capacity to play and your equipment. I don't know any pro musician who has that kind of gear. You know what I mean? And so to me, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. You spend the money however you want to spend the money. Totally. But that being said, though, I mean, if you put a 50-50 split between your effort playing the guitar and your effort towards acquiring gear, you'd really getting somewhere.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
I just recently had a student finish up his second round of lessons, and on his last lesson, he asked me for my advice, and I told him, dude, sell all your pedals. Sell all your pedals, whittle your gear down to one guitar and one amplifier and learn to play it.
Yeah.
It'll be much more rewarding in the long run.
And putting your energies where it can do you the most good as a player, too. You know what I mean? Which is on your playing.
But getting better is uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's totally true. And that's something you have to be kind of up for that challenge. It's going to not be great for a while. And you have to be able to keep swinging and keep showing up for work every time and punching your time card and practicing and just do it consistently. There's one word my students hear me say more than anything else is consistency. It's all about consistency. Just do it all the time. And
I'd rather have a student practice for a half hour 4 days in a row than to cram a 2-hour session on one day.
Yeah, that doesn't do you any good. I tell people that all the time, too.
That's right.
You got to just do it every day for 30, 40 minutes. It's funny. Every once in a while, a student will ask me a question that they really don't want to ask me, which is, well, how long did you practice when you were like 13? I'm like, about 5 hours a day, every day.
Yeah, dude, my mom had to, wake me up and tell me to put my jammies on to go to bed because I fell asleep next to my plywood classical guitar.
That you were thrilled to have.
Yeah, dude, that was knocking out like Skid Row riffs. Yeah. Right? I was playing Youth Gone Wild on my plywood classical guitar.
I think it was you that told me this quote, but passion's a lot more effective than discipline. So
and I stole that from a Steve Vai interview. So full credit to Steve Vai. Look, if he'd like to come on this podcast,
yes, of course.
Then we can, we don't have to paraphrase.
In
Steve,
typical Steve Vai fashion, leading the way.
I'm sure he could just open up a portal from whatever dimension he's in and just appear up here.
He is definitely the master of the multiverse for sure.
Dude, what? You know what?
Anybody who saw his latest video for the Hydra.
Oh yeah, totally.
Knows that guy is a master of space and time. You know
so who needs Doctor Strange when you've got Steve Vai?
Exactly right.
Thanks for listening to Rock Guitar Confidential with Scott and Ryan. Please make sure to rate and subscribe. And in the words of Ozzy Osbourne, we love you all.
But what's funny, though, is that I don't ever remember feeling angry or upset or bummed out that I had to go practice. I remember being excited. And that's something to do with, like, the times I started playing guitar, because it was so much to be excited about playing guitar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's something I think that if you have that passion, you're going to be successful. If you don't have that passion, you can still be good, but you have to be disciplined to a degree. You have to have that time where I don't feel like practicing, but you got to do it. And I think all those things combined will allow you to plug into any piece of gear and make it work.
Yeah,
you know what
absolutely.
I mean? I don't think it's going to be. You're not going to be as limited to like, I need this kind of piece of gear, or else I can't play.
Right.
It's you're going to feel more confident with that.
There's one piece of gear that, however, that I think is essential.
You tell.
And there's one piece of gear that, humbly, I could be competent with variations on this, but the most, outside of my guitars, the most important piece of gear that I have is my pick.
That's true. That's a very particular thing. Players are very, very, very specific about what picks they like.
Very picky. Sorry, I had to get it out of the way.
I missed that one.
Well, it's better just to get that one out of the way.
Yeah, you know what's funny? I'm almost like masochistic. I force myself to use different picks all the time. So I'll play with like a Fender Medium sometimes, which I would never typically do, and then I'll switch to a Jazz 3, then I'll switch to a Flow pick, and then I'll switch to like a 2 millimeter or Dunlop Gator grip, and I'll do that all the time just to mess with myself, because I find that if you stay with one pick too long, you very much become dependent upon that pick. So to me, not to try and self-torture or something, but I kind of force myself to do other. Periodically, I'll go, okay, this month is going to be a Jazz 3 month. This month's going to be a Flow 1.5 millimeter month. You know what I mean?
It's funny. I like the, I've played Jazz 3s before, and it's a stiff pick.
Yeah.
So I guess I would just be primarily in it needs to be a certain gauge, right? It's got to be like
certain thickness.
What would be known as a heavy pick? Like right now, I'm using 1.14 millimeters.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably like 1.25, something like
1.14, man.
And up. Yeah.
Love them. Yeah, they're the Dunlops, the purple ones with the with the turtle on them.
I'm all in on the Flow picks, man. I'm not the 1.5 millimeter Flow picks.
Tell me about the Flow picks.
By Dunlop. They're I don't have one with me right now, but they're kind of like an oversized Jazz 3. If that makes sense. Cool. And I've been using those for a while. But again, I do force myself to play other picks all the time, just because I've actually found that if I'm doing a session or something like that, and I'm like, say doesn't have my favorite piece of gear or something, I have to be able to roll with whatever's in my hands. And I found that it really does affect the way you approach it if you have a different kind of pick that's not your kind of preferred.
Well, since we're talking about, you may or may not have the pick. I've got the perfect accessory here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I'm undoing the keychain pick holder, and look at that. I've got, aside from the Baby Yoda pick that someone gave me,
nice.
My good friend Dave, who's also my student,
Grogu,
who also likes gear. We should have him on here sometime.
That'd be great. Yeah.
But yeah, so there we go. I'm never without my 1.14 millimeter.
You know what's funny is I find that that's the kind of thing that everybody can relate to as far as picks. Everyone's got their favorite kind of thing, and they want to roll with a certain kind of thing. And I don't know. I think I grew up with most people on Fender mediums, Fender heavies. That was kind of what I would use forever. And I think I found Dunlop like maybe 15 years into playing.
I used to use D'Andrea Brights.
Oh my gosh,
I loved them. And actually, the pick I'm using now it's really kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
it's polished, so I don't get a lot of chop with my pick attack if I don't want it. It seems to be just right the right thickness, and there's enough to grab onto. So I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I've played Jazz 3s before and some other similar picks. There's a pick on the market called a Black Ice pick, which is kind of like the same. It's kind of more like a Gator grip, but it's the size of a Jazz 3, right? Yeah. Those would be like if I just had to do do some session work, like playing a solo, then those would be totally cool. If I had to play 3 hours a night, then a small pick like that is gonna make my picking hand kind of tired. I don't know.
I've never encountered the tired hand with the Jazz 3 before. I used it for years, though, so I might be a situation where I just kind of work myself into being used to it. Yeah. What I found the Jazz 3 was a little challenging because I do a lot of two-handed tapping, and my technique is such that I tuck my pick under my forefinger when I tap.
Yep.
So having like a Jazz 3 makes that a little bit more challenging. And I'd have many a show where I'd be playing, and I'd go to do that, and I was to go get my pick back in my hand. I would drop the pick on the stage, and then I'm in the middle of the song. I play with my solo band. I play instrumental music, so it's one of those things where I would just go no pick and do the Richie Kotzen thing for the rest of that thing.
Yeah, there's a trend in that direction too.
But then I would, there's certain things. I mean, that's like anything else. It's got a real clear limitations if you're doing that. There's certain things you just can't do anymore.
Now, if you're an unlimited player like Richie Kotzen, then more power to you.
Even Richie will tell you he can't do the alternate picking stuff when he does that sort of thing. Richie's playing is brilliant and amazing, and his stuff without the pick is incredible. But
when Richie Kotzen tells me that, hey, I'm just gonna go like finger style, I'm like, okay, yeah, you've mastered like everything else, so I get that.
He's such a beast. He's such a monster.
Oh, dude, double threat too. Great singer.
Oh, incredible singer.
Right?
Oh my God, he's incredible, dude. That guy's a ridiculous talent. You know what I mean? It'd be almost like finding out that Eddie Van Halen can sing like freaking Chris Cornell or something.
Or like finding out that like Eddie Van Halen can sing like Michael Anthony. Or something.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. But I mean, I feel like you're right, because the stiff pick is going to be something that transfers your energy. So when you're picking like a fast picking concept or a sweep picking concept, all that energy goes straight to the string, as opposed to anything that's got some slack in it. You're going to lose some energy on that attack, and it doesn't have as much mids and presence when you attack that way.
Yeah.
But that being said, if you're playing an acoustic part and you're strumming and you're doing something with fast strumming, having a medium pick with maybe a little less of an angle on the pick front. That's the good way to go too, because it has a certain kind of sound. It's going to be a little bit more bright and won't have as much attack to it. You know what I mean? But I think that's what I'm trying to say is the different picks for different purposes.
Yeah,
that makes sense?
Definitely. Hey, take your pick.
That's true.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan of hybrid picking.
Oh yeah, hybrid picking because that gives you a sound you can't get any other way.
Yeah, dude, absolutely, man. I was showing a student how to play Stairway to Heaven the other day, and I mean, I'm a flat pick player, right? So I always just hybrid picked that song. But yeah, I mean, I guess Jimmy Page probably finger picked it.
Well, when you're in the studio, you can do that.
Right.
I'm sure live he hybrid picks it.
He must have. Yeah,
I'm
totally.
sure he does. You know
yeah.
You know what? One thing I would say that about gear though is, like I said, there's certain things that will accentuate things and they'll sort of take away things. Like if you're playing single coils through like a Fender Twin, you're not going to get that big metal sound. It's just not going to happen. If you're playing a Les Paul with humbuckers through that same Fender Twin, you're not going to get that spanky sort of funk sound that you want either. It just isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of figure out what kind of player you are. There is, in my experience, there is no gear that does everything. You sort of need to pick your poison a little bit. You know what I mean?
I'm going to cast my vote in favor of the coiled. The Super Strat with coil taps.
I agree. Super Strat is the perfect mousetrap. They should have stopped making guitars after the Super Strat was invented, because there's really nothing that's close to that as far as can do it all. You know? And I mean, I will stand on that.
And so this is gonna, coming from our perspective is young guitarists who came up in the mid to late 80s and then coping with what happened in the 90s. There's another
apocalypse of grunge.
Well, and there's another trend like during that time period, and that has to do with the quote vintage guitar market.
Yep.
So
that anything from the 60s and 50s became a big deal in the early and mid 90s for sure.
Yeah, man. So I've got this coffee table book that was also given to me when I started playing guitar when I was 11, and it was a great crash course in all the way from pre-guitar instruments that were more lute-based, more mandolin style, where the strings came in courses, and imagine like Robin Hood's Merry Men wearing green tights, and like this is what they would play. All the way up through the invention of the electric guitar, and then to modern day, which at the time was the early 90s. And one thing that I took away from that was, like you were talking about, building a better mousetrap. There's this evolution of, look at all the different tremolo systems, or vibrato systems is more accurate, that Fender developed. There's the Fulcrum tremolo, which is still used today for good reason. Even that's been refined. But if you look at look at vibrato systems like the Bigsby.
I don't want to look at that. Can we not look at that?
Right. Or, look at the bridge systems that come on Jazz Masters.
Yeah, terrible.
Right? There's a reason why by the 80s they weren't making those. There might have been some Bigsby's on some Gretsch, and we'll
I think that
talk about that later.
Those are guitar tremolo systems for people who have some sort of affectation for a certain era of music. I think that's what that's for.
Or an aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly.
When I see a Cologne commercial with Johnny Depp and a bunch of wolves like playing like a Gretsch with a Bigsby on it, like that's why there's a Bigsby there. It's not because it does things like stay in tune.
Or anything well vibrato.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. The Floyd Rose, we'll do a whole podcast on this later on, but it's the best tremolo system that's ever been invented. It does everything it's supposed to do. People who have issues with Floyd Roses are people who don't understand what you're supposed to do with a Floyd Rose.
Or how to tune one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not as hard as you think. It's just a matter of understanding how they work. You don't ask a Hummer to go do the Indy 500, and you don't take a moped to go off-roading. It's not a tool for that job. It's a tool for a very specific job, and it does it amazingly well.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I find that usually if you're an alternate tuning rhythm guitar kind of person, you don't really get Floyd's. If you're a lead player, Floyd is a necessity. You have to have that.
If you're playing, country music where you're doing a lot of certain double stops and types of bends and unison bends,
and you're probably not doing vibrato bar stuff in that style, though.
Right. So I get, I totally understand why the Telecaster is the choice for the country guitar player. Totally. It doesn't mean, but if you're a musician who has to, cover again, if you're doing like 3 hours of covers, or if in your own personal style you like to explore a variety of feels and vibes and genres, then
Yeah, it does everything.
Super Strat with a Floyd, man.
It does everything. Get every tone in the book with that thing, and that's just to me. That's almost indisputable. I don't understand. That was one of the things in the 90s that happened is that sort of vintage movement, like, oh, man, we need a Jaguar, we need a Les Paul Jr., that kind of thing. And it's just like, oh, so you want it to sound worse with less options.
Okay, it'd be like, I'm tired of being a Homo sapien. I think I'd rather be a Neanderthal.
Yes, exactly. Let's not go backwards. Let's keep going forwards.
Correct.
You know what I mean? And I don't know. That's another thing that's for another podcast is that guitar players tend to be shockingly conservative. It's actually
with
surprising
gear.
with gear, particularly.
Yeah,
not politically, but I'm talking about like gear.
Yeah, like gear wise. Yeah, just look at the bass section versus the guitar section at any guitar shop.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that to me, I don't know. It's so funny. I always wonder how much of this is just my own perspective and how like limited I am because of like where I grew up and why I see things. But to me, like the zenith of guitar design was like in like 1991. That's
totally.
Like they had it all figured out at that point.
Which, by the way, is all the result of Eddie Van Halen being an inventor and and also a guy named Floyd Rose, a jeweler from Reno, who was out doing cover gigs with his Fender Strat and
saying, "Hey, this can be better. We can do something different."
That's right.
I mean?
Why is my guitar always out of tune? And then he wakes up and looks at the nut of his guitar and goes, "Oh yeah."
Yep, it's totally true.
Friction is the enemy.
Yeah, I wonder how much of the anti-Floyd Rose sentiment is from people who are like blues rock guitar players from the 60s who all of a sudden found themselves becoming obsolete when Eddie Van Halen came out and was doing the stuff he was doing. I wonder how much of that hostility towards the Floyd was really wrapped up in this sort of fear of being replaced or not being valued anymore because there's this new generation coming up and doing something different. And I wonder how much of that was a part of the anti-Floyd, anti-Super Strat sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the anti-Floyd, anti-Super Strat thing, it goes hand in hand with the change in radio formats in the 90s. So, this whole notion that anything that's raw is good.
Yeah.
Right?
I want it to sound like a garage band. Yeah.
Right. Or, Kurt Cobain plays a jazz stang thing, right? And then later on, and you know what?
Maybe I also should not shower.
Yeah, well, or like Jack White's playing a shoebox with like some shoelaces tied to it. It must be good. And to be fair, I'm not a Jack White hater. There's some White Stripe stuff that I think is vibey. And you know what? He was a couple years ago. He was on the cover of Guitar World playing in EVH.
Yep, that's the one redeeming thing about Jack White.
And he was talking all about how hey, look, this guitar is easy to play. Wow.
Yeah.
And I was like, well,
it sounds good. And
that's the point.
I want my guitar to be terrible. That's my job.
Yeah, right. Yeah. If it's terrible, and I mean, I've had friends like that. I mean, I've got over here on top of one of the amplifiers in my studio, I've got a Harmony guitar that was gifted to me by a friend who's blues guitar player guy, and he's really good. And I learned a lot about how to play with conviction and like open up in front of people musically. But man, he was definitely in that club of dirty old strings sound better. Dude, no, they don't. They just don't.
Well, I think what's funny is we need to acknowledge that there's a little bit of subjectivity of what is good and bad, and everyone's got their own opinion and has to be respected. But that being said, yeah, you're right. It doesn't sound as good.
You know what? I think all of this boils down to, what I want for myself when it comes to gear and also in my own playing is I want control and I want options.
Yep. And you want something that functions properly all the time and gets you a good tone. And It's crazy. So, all right, well, let's start wrapping that up after this. So, I don't know. Long story short, you got to practice more. Your tone is mostly in your fingers, but you need some decent gear to bring it out.
Yep, there's versatility out there. Get yourself a Super Strat with coil taps, so it sounds like a Strat, it sounds like a Les Paul. You're good to go.
Yep, and a decent amplifier. And I would say that you're very fortunate if you're starting out nowadays because you've never had more selection in reasonable prices than ever. You can get a decent guitar for $250, decent amp for about the same. For $500, you're walking out the door with something that gets you some legit tones.
Yeah, make sure to shop at your privately owned local music store.
Yes, if you can find them still. That's the key. The key.
I'll plug Skip's Music in Sacramento, California. I teach there, full disclosure. But, make sure you spend your money somewhere where that investment's going to come back and benefit you in a music program or a place for your teachers to do their thing.
One other big advantage to a local store too is you're going to usually have people who are a lot more knowledgeable about what they're selling, and it can really give you advice that you can take seriously. as opposed to someone who's just killing time until their punk band becomes huge. You know what I mean?
Well, and the profits aren't going to like pad shareholders and CEOs' pockets. I mean, that's just a reality.
That is totally true.
Yeah,
totally true. All right, so this is the Rock Guitar Confidential podcast with Rob and Scott.
Rob, who's Rob?
I'm Scott, and you're Ryan.
That's right.
Where's the Rob coming from? I don't know if that's going to... Who am I again? Am I Scott? I'm Scott. Okay,
no. So again, this is thanks for tuning in. This is a Rock Guitar Confidential with Scott and Ryan.
That's right. Scott and Ryan's our names. I figured that one out finally. That's
right.
good. That's amazing. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed this. If you want to catch up with any of the stuff that we get going on, you can always catch us on social media or via our individual socials. We're going to be working on having a joint social very shortly.
Yes.
So we'll have more information on it in future podcasts. Thanks so much.